The sun hung low over the sprawling fields as the village came into view. Daniel felt his heartbeat quicken. A year had passed since he last walked these roads, the scent of damp earth and wood smoke greeting him like an old friend. He adjusted the strap of his bag, his fingers tightening around the worn leather handle. The journey from the city had been long and grueling, but all of that would soon be forgotten. He was home. His thoughts lingered on Lillian. His wife. His love. He imagined her waiting at their doorstep, her eyes bright with joy, arms open to embrace him after all these months apart. Distance had been cruel, but he had done everything he could to provide for her. A steady stream of money sent home, letters filled with promises of a brighter future. Yet, as he stepped onto the familiar dirt path leading to his house, something felt off. The village had always been a quiet place, but today, the silence was different. He caught sight of Grandmother Margaret, the elderly woman who had known him since childhood, watching from her wooden porch. She smiled, but there was something guarded in her expression. A nod of acknowledgement, and then she turned away. Strange. Daniel pressed on. His house stood just beyond the cluster of banana trees, its thatched roof the same as he remembered. But when he reached the front door and pushed it open, there was no joyful embrace. No hurried footsteps. No Lillian. The small living space was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of something unfamiliar. Cologne, perhaps? He frowned. His footsteps echoed as he moved deeper inside. Then, a sound, soft, hurried movements from the bedroom. His pulse surged. Lillian. A pause. Then the door creaked open, and she appeared. Her beauty struck him just as it always had. Dark, soulful eyes, full lips parted in what should have been a smile. But there was hesitation in the way she stood, her fingers curling around the edge of the doorframe. "Daniel, you're early," she said, her voice breathless. "Early?" He let out a soft chuckle, though his stomach twisted. "I've been gone a year." She stepped forward, placing a hand on his arm, but the warmth he had expected was absent. I didn't expect you today," she murmured. He studied her. There was something in her gaze, an unease she failed to mask. His eyes flickered past her, scanning the room. That was when he noticed it. A wristwatch sat atop the bedside table. Sleek. Expensive. Not his. A slow, creeping cold settled in his chest. "Whose is that?" he asked, nodding toward it. Lillian's lips parted, but no words came. For the briefest moment, a shadow of panic crossed her face. Then, too quickly, she forced a laugh, reaching for the watch. "Oh, it's, John's. He must have left it when he visited last week." John. His closest friend. Daniel narrowed his eyes. John had never owned anything like that. His hands, rough from years of labor, never bore such luxury. He knew this. And yet, he said nothing. The silence stretched. Lillian turned away too quickly, placing the watch in a drawer. "You must be tired from the journey. Sit. I'll get you some water." She disappeared into the kitchen before he could respond. Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. A deep, gnawing unease settled in his gut. He turned toward the window, catching sight of something else. Footprints in the dirt outside. Large. Recent. Leading toward the back of the house. The back door creaked ever so slightly, as though it had been disturbed not long ago. Something was wrong. As he sat down, the voices of the villagers outside drifted through the window. Low murmurs, the kind people made when they knew something but didn't dare say it aloud. Daniel's hands curled into fists. The home he had dreamed of returning to, the love he had clung to during his hardest nights, suddenly felt unfamiliar. Daniel lay awake in bed that night, his thoughts tangled like vines. The rhythmic chirping of crickets outside did little to soothe him. Something wasn't right. Lillian had barely met his gaze since his arrival. The tight embrace he had envisioned had been replaced by nervous glances, forced smiles, and that damned wristwatch, a luxury that had no place in his modest home. And those footprints. They had been fresh, leading toward the back of the house. Who had been here before he arrived? He turned on his side, watching Lillian's silhouette in the dim light. She slept facing away from him, her breathing shallow and uneven. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to shake off the unease clawing at his mind. But Daniel had learned long ago that a man's gut never lied. By morning, the village was alive with its usual hum: women at the wells, men tending to their cattle, children laughing in the distance. Daniel, however, moved with a quiet determination. He needed answers. As he stepped outside, he noticed John, his old friend, leaning against a tree near the house, watching him with an expression that bordered on concern. "Did you sleep well, brother?" John asked, his voice measured. Daniel studied him. "Not quite. My mind is restless." John exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I can imagine. You've been gone a long time." Something in his tone made Daniel pause. "You say that like things have changed in my absence." John hesitated. His gaze flickered toward the house before meeting Daniel's. "Daniel, listen." "John." Lillian's voice rang out from behind them. Both men turned. She stood at the doorway, a polite but firm smile on her lips. "I was looking for you. Come, your breakfast is ready." Daniel noted the tension in John's posture, the way his friend's mouth pressed into a thin line before he muttered, "Be careful, brother." Then, with a nod, John turned and walked away. Daniel watched him go, his stomach tightening. The day stretched on, but the unease did not fade. Lillian moved around him like a ghost, present yet distant. She made small talk, but her laughter was hollow. That afternoon, Daniel wandered toward the back of the house. The footprints from the previous day had been swept away, but he knew what he had seen. As he studied the ground, his eyes landed on something new, a cigarette butt, half buried in the dirt. Daniel frowned. He had never smoked a day in his life. Neither had Lillian. A chill crawled down his spine. Then he heard it, a rustle from the trees beyond the fence. His head snapped up. Someone was there. Without hesitation, he strode toward the noise. The trees were dense, their shadows deep. He pushed through the branches, heart pounding. And then, a flash of movement. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, and quick on his feet. He darted away the moment he saw Daniel, disappearing deeper into the trees. "Hey!" Daniel shouted, breaking into a run. The man was fast, but Daniel's determination was greater. He followed, his feet kicking up dust, branches scratching at his arms. But just as he neared the clearing, the figure was gone, vanished as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. Panting, Daniel stopped, his chest heaving. Whoever the man was, he had been near his house, hiding, watching. And Lillian had tried to stop him from talking to John. The truth was closing in, and it was uglier than he had imagined. By the time Daniel returned home, Lillian was waiting on the porch. Her eyes widened when she saw the state of him. Dust-covered, breathless, his face carved with suspicion. "Where were you?" she asked. Daniel stared at her. "You tell me." Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead of pressing further, he walked past her. He had seen enough. The night would bring its own revelations. For now, he needed to prepare. The night was thick with silence, the kind that wrapped around Daniel like a vice. He sat in the dimly lit living room, his fingers tracing the rim of a wooden cup he had no intention of drinking from. His mind was elsewhere, on the shadows beyond the house, the footprints that had disappeared too conveniently, and the man in the trees. Tonight, he would have his answer. He had told Lillian he would be leaving for the city at dawn. He watched her reaction carefully as he packed a small bag, stuffing it with just enough belongings to make the deception believable. She had nodded, her expression unreadable, but something flickered in her eyes. Was it relief? Now, hidden in the darkness outside, he waited. An hour passed. Then 2. The village had long since fallen asleep, save for the occasional bark of a stray dog. Just as doubt began to creep in, a sound shattered the quiet. Footsteps. Soft. Deliberate. Approaching the house. Daniel's grip tightened around the wooden handle of the knife he had tucked at his side. Not to harm, but to remind himself that this was real. That his instincts had not lied. The back door creaked open. A figure slipped inside. Mark. Daniel recognized him instantly. Broad-shouldered. Confident. The same man who had fled into the trees the day before. Rage burned in Daniel's chest, but he swallowed it down. Not yet. He moved quietly, pressing against the shadows as he approached the open doorway. Inside, Lillian stood before Mark, her arms crossing her chest. Not in defiance, but in an almost familiar way. "I told you it was too soon," she whispered, glancing toward the bedroom. "What if he's still awake?" "He left, didn't he?" Mark's voice was low, amused. "And if he comes back?" He trailed off with a shrug. Daniel stepped forward. "He never left." Lillian gasped, whirling around. Her face drained of color. Mark's muscles tensed, his eyes darting toward the exit. A guilty man's instinct. "Going somewhere?" Daniel's voice was calm, too calm. Mark straightened, schooling his expression. "Daniel, this isn't what it looks like." Daniel let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "It looks like my wife let another man into my home in the middle of the night." His gaze shifted to Lillian, and something inside him cracked. "It looks exactly like what I feared." Lillian opened her mouth, then closed it. Mark exhaled, rolling his shoulders back. "Look, man, Daniel held up a hand. "Save it." His chest tightened as he turned to Lillian. "How long?" She flinched at the question. A tear slipped down her cheek, but it did not move him. "Daniel, How long?" Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. 6 months, she whispered. The confession landed like a blow. Not just the betrayal, but the length of it. Half a year of lies, of stolen moments while he toiled away in the city, believing she was waiting for him. A bitter laugh escaped him. 6 months. So, while I was working to build our life, you were tearing it apart. Lillian's sobs grew heavier. I was lonely, Daniel. You were gone for so long, and You what? His voice was sharp now. You thought I had forgotten you? You thought that justified this? He gestured toward Mark, who had the decency to at least look uncomfortable. I never meant to hurt you, she said through her tears. Daniel shook his head. But you did. The weight of betrayal pressed down on him, suffocating. He had imagined returning home to love, to warmth. Instead, he had walked into a deception carefully woven behind his back. Mark shifted awkwardly. Maybe I should run. Daniel cut in. That's what you did yesterday, wasn't it? Mark said nothing. The silence stretched again. Then, from outside, came the low murmur of voices. The villagers. The argument had not gone unnoticed. Whispers would spread. Grandmother Margaret's voice rang out from somewhere beyond the gate, quiet but firm. The truth always finds its way home. Lillian covered her face, shoulders trembling. Daniel exhaled, the last of his anger giving way to something colder. Something final. I can't stay here, he murmured. Lillian's head snapped up. No, Daniel, please. We can fix this. There's nothing left to fix. His voice was steady, resolved. This was not a wound that time would heal. He turned, stepping toward the door. Where will you go? She asked, voice small. Daniel paused, glancing back one last time. Away. And with that, he walked out. He did not look back.